Good morning, Lismore. I'm sure there are many of you who would like to convey your congratulations to Mimi Suffolk, who's been baptised this morning at Alstonville Church. And I think there's also a big camp going on in Queensland, is that correct? So I'm not going to put down the fact that there's more empty seats here this morning to my bad preaching. I'm going to look for other excuses. Is that all right, Auntie Barbara? I have the approval of the ex-conference president's wife. I think we're in a good and safe place to be. Let's pray before we begin. Father in heaven, thank you so much for being the light of the world. And please, Lord, help us to see you today, to understand how much you love us and that you have given us the privilege of reflecting your light to others. We can only do this with you in our story. May we stay close to yours is my prayer in Jesus' name. Amen. It's been a long week. Do any of you love bed as much as I do? Bed for me is my most happy place. I watch the clock. Yvette will tell you this is true. And sometimes it can be 6:30 on a Friday afternoon and I'll say to Yvette, it's 9 o'clock, let's go to bed. She'll say, the sun hasn't even set. But I love bed. It's my happy place. The rich, the poor, the bright, the not so bright, the affluent, the disadvantaged. There is a certain equalising that occurs when you drift off into sleep. Nobody needs to pay a lot of money for a good dream. I love bed. And I'm snuggled in my warm bed, cosy and comfortable, and the wave pattern of my brain rhythms would make any sleep physician envious when suddenly the light turns on. Why is the light on? I ask my wife. Well, she says, electrons moving through a directional semiconductor recombine with electron holes to release photons in a process called electroluminescence. I'm not impressed. It's nearly midnight and I'm in no mood for a dissertation on physics. But I try and be kind and rephrase my question. Darling, I don't want to know how the light works. I want to know why you turned it on. We have a 16-year-old dog called Millie. And Millie is well loved, but she has now become incontinent. And there are various times where, in order to preserve much hard floor cleaning, my wife is quick to take her outside to see if we can be spared some of her mess. Millie needs to go outside and I need to see. Genesis is the first book of the Christian Bible. It is a book of beginnings. It tells us a little about why the lights are on. There are some people who try and understand from the book of Genesis, the early chapters, how God turned the lights on. But after many years of reading Genesis and the corresponding and books that come after it, I am persuaded that the Genesis story is not so much a description of how light works, but why the lights are on. Who is looking forward with me to going to a class on quantum mechanics in heaven? It's going to be so exciting, isn't it? As Jesus tells us the truth about Schrodinger's cat, discussions between Niels Bohr and Einstein, helps us to understand superposition and the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. We're going to have so much fun, would you agree? But if you get a bunch of quantum physicists in a room together and ask them to explain to you in minute detail how the world works, you will find that there are a bunch of curious minds there who are relatively confident that they know something, but all of them will be universally agreed they don't know everything. And I think good theologians could learn some lessons from quantum physicists. Curious to fill the holes and gaps in their understanding, but aware that there is joy in the discovery. And I can't wait to sit at Jesus' feet and learn from the one that put it all together, how it all works. Are you with me? But I think that the Genesis account is not so much there as a how I did it manual, but rather why I did it. The first verse of the book of Genesis reads this way: "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." There are 5 W's that I've found helpful in my own reading and understanding of the Bible: when, where, who, what, where, and why. And if you're new to studying the Bible, or if you've been studying the Bible for a very long time, these 5 W questions can really help you unpack and understand the passage that you are reading. Where is it happening? Who is speaking? What is it about? Why is this text there? If we look at the Genesis account and we read the first verse again, we can find out when, we can find out who, we can find out where, we can find out what, but can anybody in the first verse of Genesis find an answer to why? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It is not until we get to the second verse that we really get to the essence of the why. The second verse of the first chapter of the first book of the Bible reads this way: "The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters." Here are 3 descriptives of problems that God needs to address. As the originator and author of our creation, God makes the heavens and the earth has a problem. It is without shape, it is without population, and it is dark. And I want you to see how in the creation story God addresses these 3 problems. Let there be light, God says, and now we can see that the earth is formless and empty. So God deals with the undefined nature of our world by forming spaces. The Hebrew word translated create is linked to the idea of cutting. And as you read through the Genesis account of creation, you get the idea that God is creating by cutting and dividing, by organising spaces. He cuts the day from the night. He cuts the sky from the sea. He cuts the sea so that dry land is formed. And in a sense, those 3 problems that were there in the beginning of the creation account, that the earth was formless and void and dark, are now beginning to be addressed. Let there be light, there is light. Now there is space. But that space is empty. So God sets about another cycle of 3 days. And in the sky, he populates it with the sun, moon and stars. In the sea, he populates it with fish. In the sky, he populates it with birds. And finally, on the 6th day, he populates the land with animals and man. And when God has finished his creative act, he cuts out and separates a day of time to be holy. In essence, the Sabbath becomes for us an opportunity for us to look back and study what God has done, to remember who he is, and to learn through his creative activity and the people that he has filled his creation with what God is like. It is an echo of his first act of creation in bringing light into darkness that God asks us to pause in time and see who he is, to dispel the darkness around us and allow us to know that he is our God. This idea of challenging darkness with light, of defining shape from chaos and filling emptiness with beings, this becomes the template of the whole story of the Bible. And it is why in the book of Genesis, it is the first recorded act of God for our blessing and our benefit. Why did God make the world? Why did he turn the lights on? We are given the template because God is in the business of finding chaos and organising it, filling it with people, and then giving those people purpose. The Bible describes for us the creative act of man, and it says God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. And he blessed them and he said, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it." We are in our own sphere to be recreators, echoing the original creative act. To find a space, to fill it with beings, and to give those beings purpose. Before sin, God gave our first parents a place called earth. They were to fill it with their offspring, and they alone, with their offspring, were to become the custodians of creation. Their purpose was to exercise dominion in the original sense, where dominion is custodianship and stewardship of God's creation. I am persuaded, after looking at life, reading history and studying my Bible, that a misunderstanding of these three fundamental first acts of God lie at the heart of the sin problem and the problems of humanity in general. When we forget where we are, when we forget who we are, when we forget why we are here, we are prone to be misled by the one that would mess up God's creation. If we do understand where we are, who we are, and why we are here, we are much more likely to have happy homes, happy churches, happy families, and the world will be a better place. When I look at these three problems, I would say that we as human beings have done reasonably well at being fruitful and multiplying. Would you agree? The earth certainly doesn't lack for population. I also think that most Christians are reasonably capable of understanding the divine mandate to find a space and create a place where they can have families and populate them and fill them up. But I sometimes wonder whether we have really lost a sense that we find a space and a place and we fill it with families for a purpose. We can build a beautiful church. We can have an address. We can have a boundary fence. We can have people in the pews. But do we fully appreciate the fact that God has called us for a purpose? There is a whole series of sermons in understanding what our purpose really is. But in the original covenant promise that God made with man, his purpose was to govern. In its truest sense, humanity is at its fullest when it understands its responsibility to be stewards and custodians of God's creation. And it is not a coincidence that when the devil came along with the intent of interfering and interrupting God's creative story, that he challenged our first parents around the issue of accountability and responsibility. You won't die, he said. There's no consequence to you rebelling against God. And instead of being accountable to somebody else, you only need to be accountable to yourself. It has ever been the tactics of the devil to take our eyes away from God so that we only see ourselves. And once we are persuaded that we are only answerable to ourselves, we will become his plaything. And I want you to notice how God responded to our first parents after they had sinned. In response to the entry of sin, God asked our first parents three questions. Where are you? That is, what is your place? Who told you? That is, who are your people? And what have you done? That is, what is your purpose? If we fully understood that we are in God's country, with God's people, for God's glory, Do you think the problem of sin would have been such a problem in the world today? In that garden courtroom, God himself recognised more than Adam and Eve did the tragedy of their confusion. And God stepped into our story to redeem us and our story. The gospel, first explained to our parents, shows where the true fight will occur. It will be between God and the serpent who had misrepresented what is true. And God will win, and it will be abundantly clear to all watching who belong to him. As we move forward in the Genesis story, the majority of the book of Genesis revolves around a central character called Abraham, to whom God made a promise. And if you notice in the first covenant promise made to Abraham, you will see a recurrence of this theme that I'm suggesting exists in the biblical story. The Lord said to Abraham, I want you to leave your native country, your relatives and your father's family, and I want you to go to a land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. I will bless you and I'll make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who treat you with contempt. All families of the earth will be blessed through you. Can you see in the covenant promise this recurring theme? I want you to carve out a space. I want you to populate it with people. And I want you to understand that those people will have purpose. And that purpose will be to be my light to the rest of the world. As we begin to see this threefold theme develop, we can see the creation story in context. God is love, and love will prosper when it finds place, people, and purpose. Created in God's image, we will find our greatest happiness when we know where we belong, when we know who our people are, and when we have a clear sense of why we are here. When John in the New Testament begins his gospel, we can hear echoes of the creation narrative. We are introduced to God, and more specifically Jesus, as being the Word, the light, and the life. God came into a place of darkness where the fables and traditions and customs of man had obliterated the image of the true God, and Jesus came to rescue the reputation of God and an understanding of who he truly was. The Bible tells us that light collided with darkness, and darkness was not able to overcome it. And so we see Jesus, the recreator and the reinitiator of a new covenant, where Jesus says, I am building a kingdom and I want to fill it with people, and I want those people to understand that they have a purpose. There is a beautiful text in the Old Testament in the book of Jeremiah that kind of, by reversing the creation order, gives us an understanding of how important this idea of knowing God and understanding God and being able to tell the truth about God really is. It's found in Jeremiah, the 4th chapter, and it reads this way. My people are foolish. They do not know me. They are stupid children. They have no understanding. They are wise only in doing evil, but to do good they do not know. I looked on the earth, and behold, it was without form and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. Can you see it in the text? The light of creation and the establishment of a space and a place for people of purpose is derailed when we stop understanding who God is. Jesus turned up because creation, instead of moving forward, was regressing. The great laws of entropy were at work, and disorder and chaos were gaining the preeminence. And so Jesus stepped back into our space with the good news that light would again collide with darkness, and that light would win. Jesus came to tackle the darkness of misunderstanding. He will be the light of the world, and all who will allow him to act in their space will become believers of a new kingdom. They will become new part of a new community. They will bear the identity of a new place. Jesus spoke to the people who believed in him, and he said, "Don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. There is more than enough room in my Father's house. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going to prepare a place for you. When everything is ready, I'm going to come and get you so that you can be with me where I am." Jesus said to his disciples, "I am the way, the truth and the life. No one can come to the Father but through me." Can you see in the new covenant promise of the New Testament, of the new kingdom, that Jesus is saying, I want to make a place and I want to fill it with people, and I want those people to understand the purpose that I have is that humanity and divinity can be reconciled, that people can see me clearly, and that they can be at peace with me. Jesus is making a place for us. And it's not going to be an empty space. It's not going to be formless and void. It's not going to be dark. It will be filled with many rooms. There will be a room there with your name on it. We didn't get to create ourselves. We didn't get to call light out of darkness. But God says to us, if you put your confidence in me, then I can bring order from disorder in your story. I can surround you with people of like mind. And I can give you a purpose and a mandate to make me known in the world. What had happened in Jesus' day? People had taken the core of the covenant and had corrupted it so that they were focused mainly on land and people, but had forgotten about purpose. A system of thought had developed that reframed the promise of place and people to become introspective and selfish. Indifferent to the world around them, some people in Jesus' days misunderstood the promise of giving prominence to the privileged at the expense of others. Barriers went up and exclusivity became normalised. Jesus was accused of being disrespectful to their thought system. And when he started saving sinners and inviting others into his kingdom, holy eyebrows were raised by those who thought they were called apart to stay apart and not for a purpose. Jesus came to tackle this misunderstanding, to create a place that he called his kingdom and to fill it with people full of purpose. And now he says to you and me, the gospel is not just about giving you place and people, it's about giving you purpose. Do we know what that is? Are we comfortable knowing why we have been called into a Christian community? Jesus wants us to be the light of the world. Jesus wants us to live our lives in such a way that those within our sphere of influence can see what God has done for us, in us, and through us. Jesus wants to fill his kingdom with people who take seriously their purpose of being light to a world that lies in darkness. The first recorded question between God and man reads this way: where are you? It begins the story of covenant. And the last recorded invitation in Revelation says, come. We could really condense the whole Bible into those two statements. Where are you? Have you lost your sense of place? Have you forgotten who your people are? Do you misunderstand why you are here? Then come. Come to the source of light. Come to that place where darkness can be disbanded. Come to that place where you will know where you belong who loves you, and why you are here. It's nearly midnight, and Jesus wants to turn the lights on so that we can see. He wants to confront the confusion and the emptiness and the darkness. He wants us to know him, and he wants us to live with him. And my prayer for Lismore Church this morning, as it is my prayer for myself, is that we let him do his creative work in us, for us, and through us. And that we work with him to dispel the darkness around us. Why did God create people, place, and purpose? Because this is what love is all about. Those of us who are privileged to have found partners and formed our own little homes and families, we know intuitively about carving out a space, calling it a house, filling it with people, calling it a home. But let us never forget that our house and our home are there for a purpose, and that is to shatter the darkness and to become light. So wherever you are and whoever you are, if you want to live in the light of his glory, my invitation to you this